Today's video, we have lots of news to cover, including the Calgary Flames. Now they've been eliminated from the playoffs. Speculation begins on what changes we're going to see in that organization. Could they be substantial? Could it involve the coach, the GM, the players? We'll discuss that scenario. Plus, we have a prospect with the New York Rangers organization that's available as well. We have lots of updates regarding the NHL playoffs. Lots of important games going down last night and tonight to kind of settle who's getting in and who's not. We have some signings, an interesting dilemma with the Leafs goaltending situation. Who's tending goal for the Leafs tonight and why has it been so complicated? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to cover here today, so let's dive right in and get started. But before we get in too far into that, I want to have another moment here where we take a second and look back on this day in hockey history. All the way back in 1980 was the last time we seen Gordie Howe, the Mr. Hockey himself, the hockey legend, appeared in his last game. It was a playoff game where he was playing for the Hartford Whalers, and the Whalers were eliminated from the playoffs by the Montreal Canadiens. So that was Howe's last on-ice game. And of course, in 1989, goaltender Ron Hextall of the Philadelphia Flyers became the first NHL goalie to score a goal in the playoffs. Of course, Hextall scored multiple times, but was the first one to do it in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. So a couple of big moments there in NHL history. Speaking of big moments in NHL history, we had a lot of those last night. It was an important night of milestones in the NHL last evening. We had two players who have had fantastic careers, both hit their 1,000 point plateau, and it's the first time ever in NHL history that two NHL players have hit the 1,000 point plateau in the same day, the same evening. It started with Claude Giroux and the Ottawa Senators, who were home for their final home game of the season against the Carolina Hurricanes, and his line, along with Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle, came out strong in the first period. Entering the game, Giroux had 998 points, was too shy of the big milestone, and it didn't take long. He scored the first goal of the game not far into the first period, had 999, and then later in the period, he set up Tim Stützle for a goal and had the 1,000 points. So they made sure they took care of business early. Of course, the whole bench emptied up to celebrate with Giroux. Big moment, of course, being close to home. He had a lot of family in attendance, wife, kids, parents, etc., lots of friends, and it was an absolutely huge moment for the hometown boy to do it in Ottawa. And Joe Pavelski in Dallas also hit the 1,000 point plateau as well. Also a big celebration with his teammates. Another big moment. So Pavelski and Giroux both hit the 1,000 points last night. And that wasn't the end of it for milestones. We also saw for the first time in over 30 years an NHL defenseman has hit the 100 point plateau. And the season is not over. San Jose Sharks defenseman Erik Karlsson continued his miraculous run this year, putting up a couple more goals to hit the 100 point plateau. First time in 31 years and only the sixth defenseman to ever do it. So certainly a huge moment of milestones last night. And I certainly hope Erik Karlsson wins the Norris Trophy. I've seen some people saying he shouldn't win it because the defensive numbers may not be as good and all that. But to be honest, I think he's had a miraculous year. This is a historic season, and I think it would absolutely be highway robbery for him not to win it. If he's got such a huge lead in the point total, I think it would be an absolute shame if he didn't do so. Now on to the games that are meaningful here. We saw a few things happen last night. The Winnipeg Jets picked up a big victory last night, and so did the Nashville Predators. With the Jets winning and the Predators beating the Flames are done. Calgary has now officially been eliminated from playoff contention. We're going to talk about the Flames a little bit further just a little bit later here in the video. So that Western Conference battle is now down to two teams. The Preds are still alive, but it's an unlikely situation. They don't have good math, as Elliot Friedman would put it, going in their favor. The Jets do have a favorable lead in points, and they both teams here actually have, I believe they have the same opponents to finish out the season as well. So it's not going to be an easy schedule for either team. I believe they play the Wild and the Avalanche, both pretty strong teams in their own right. So we'll see if the Predators can pull off a miracle, but it looks pretty good for the Jets to get into the Western Conference playoffs. Of course, the Florida Panthers battled the Leafs last night, picked up a big, important point. They did lose the game, but they lost in overtime, so they got 1 point at least, which puts them into a little bit more securely into wildcard 1. The Islanders still sit in wildcard 2, 1 point behind. And of course, a point behind them is the Pittsburgh Penguins. But the Penguins' final 2 games are against weak opponents in Chicago and Columbus. Whereas meanwhile, the Islanders blew it last night in an embarrassing loss to a depleted Washington Capitals team and put themselves in a major risky situation to miss out on the playoffs. Now, the Islanders technically hold a spot today, but they only got 1 game left, and the Penguins have 2, and except they're against weak opponents, the Penguins can pass them easily unless the Penguins absolutely blow it against Chicago or Columbus, which to me is doubtful at this point in the season. I would think those teams would probably rather work on their Bedard sweepstakes odds than winning a hockey game. So we will see where it goes, but certainly not good in that scenario at all. We'll see how tonight's action, impacts things here a little bit further. Some signings today as well. The Chicago Blackhawks today announced that they've extended defenseman Jerard Tinordi. He's going to remain with the Blackhawks on a 1-year contract extension valued at $1.25 million. And the Seattle Kraken today have signed an undrafted prospect, the centerman Logan Morrison, who's a 20-year-old in the OHL, putting up some pretty good numbers. Has gotten his 3-year ELC from the Seattle Kraken. Of course, he played the bulk of his junior career with the Hamilton Bulldogs, but was traded this year near the deadline to the Ottawa 67s, who are still in the OHL playoffs. So it's certainly good on Morrison. He's having a good season. Has earned himself an ELC, of course, with Seattle. Now, there's also been the NHL insiders expecting as early as tomorrow. Tomorrow seems to be the day penciled on calendars that we're going to get an announcement regarding NHL games taking place in the fall in Australia. I believe there's going to be representatives from the teams in LA and Arizona, being those 2 NHL teams, announced in Australia tomorrow. And it's going to be preseason games by the sounds of it, so they won't actually be regular season affairs. So I would suspect it'll probably take place sometime in late September, but we'll get all the firm final details tomorrow. This has been speculated on here now for a few weeks, but it sounds like that it's going to be made official tomorrow. Now, another prospect as well, Skyler Brind'Amour, son of Carolina Hurricanes head coach Rod Brind'Amour, who of course was now a national champion. Skyler Brind'Amour was part of the Quinnipiac team that won the national championship over the University of Minnesota. It was an Oilers draft pick, and it was confirmed today that he's not going to be signing with the Edmonton Oilers, and he will become an unrestricted free agent later this summer. So obviously Skyler Brind'Amour was, I don't think there's anything, issues with the organization or anything. I think he's just looking at that stacked team with all those long-term deals with the big-time forwards and saying, I don't see an opportunity for myself to get into any kind of NHL action. So I'm not sure where he's going to end up. I would suspect that, there's a chance maybe the Hurricanes talk to him. I don't know. But certainly had himself a good college career. And like I said, the Oilers, at the time when he was drafted, he probably thought he would sign there because things were obviously very different. But it certainly added a lot of pieces. And, having second thoughts here. As of right now, we're going to have a couple of more NHL debuts take place today, including Luke Hughes with the New Jersey Devils. By the time this goes on YouTube, the games will already be underway, maybe even near the end. But Luke Hughes is debuting tonight for the New Jersey Devils. We also got word that Matt Coronado will indeed make his debut with the Calgary Flames. Their game doesn't go, of course, until tomorrow. Minnesota Wild defender Brock Faber had a terrific debut last night. By the end of the game, he was actually the Minnesota Wild player who led the team in ice time. You could tell he was being trusted in pretty much all situations and had a really good debut. Looks like he's going to be one of their better defensemen pretty early and will have a big impact on that team and certainly have no problem securing himself a top 6 spot regularly likely next season. Now, as I mentioned, the Maple Leafs goaltending situation has been a hot topic of debate throughout the day today. I've seen a lot of different opinions, lots of different speculation, and we do finally know now, like I said, by the time this hits YouTube, the Leafs will already be in action, the game will be underway, but we know that right now Joseph Woll is indeed going to be the goalie. There was a lot of talk earlier today that the Maple Leafs were not going to be allowed to call Woll up from the minors and that they were going to have to maybe go with a mystery goaltender on another amateur tryout. When they sign these goalies to amateur tryouts, they're only good for one game, so they can't retain them on the amateur tryout for multiple days. So the other guys that they've already had, like the guy that played in the 1 minute or so and change in Toronto, and then they had obviously somebody in the backing up Samsonov for the game against the Panthers. They're not eligible to continue, so obviously they'd have to sign somebody else. So they do have another goalie that they've signed here, Obviously, the reason, though, they were not allowed to go with an emergency call-out for their game last night against the Florida Panthers was that the league deemed that the Maple Leafs created the emergency situation themselves. And they technically did, because they made space on their roster to create enough space to do a call-up. But instead of calling up a goaltender, they signed Matthew Knies. So that's nobody's fault but their own that they left themselves short at the goaltender position. So that's why they were originally denied that. And they had to wait. But now that they've played another game short, they've now been allowed to go ahead and do this emergency recall. Samsonov is, I think he'll be okay to start game one of the playoffs, but is dealing with a little something, and they wanted to rest him. So he's not playing tonight, and he will not play their final game Thursday either. At least that's the expectation here. As of today, Matt Murray was confirmed to be dealing with a concussion. So no real clear idea on when he's going to be able to return. So I suspect Joseph Woll will likely start these final two games, and he'll have a goaltender likely on an ATO for tonight for sure, and maybe Thursday. I don't know. They probably don't even want Samsonov backing up, and heaven forbid something happened to Woll. They probably wouldn't really want him going in so that he can be rested and healthy for game one of the playoffs. Of course, tonight is against the Tampa Bay Lightning as well, who they already know is going to be their first round opponent. There's no need on taking any chances of getting anybody injured if they don't need to be. The Leafs are sitting on a number of players as well for load management purposes tonight, including Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and Mark Giordano. I know I seen a sign that came up from a little boy showing in warm-up earlier today, saying that he had traveled all the way from Toronto to see his heroes 34-16, and he was down by the glass with this sign. And Marner and Matthews are not even playing tonight. Like, I understand load management. I really do. From a business organizational standpoint, I get it. You want your players rested. You want them healthy. You don't want to take unnecessary risks. I get all that. But from a fan's perspective, we pay good money to go to these games. And in some cases, like this little boy, travel long distances. Depending on where we live, getting to an NHL game is not the easiest. And sometimes we travel on vacation to different destinations to follow our favorite teams around. And it costs a lot of money, not only for the travel expense, but the tickets to go see these games. And you want to be able to see the top players when you go. Like, you can't help. I know I've been to enough games myself. And when you get there and you find out one of the top players isn't playing, you kind of feel ripped off. Now, you understand if the player's injured and there's a good reason why they can't play, that's, out of their hands. But when it's load management reasons or they're resting, like I said, I get it. I see both sides, but I just really feel for this young kid fan who's hoping to see his heroes play an NHL game while he's in Florida, and obviously his family has spent the money to bring him there, and they're not going to play. That's just really disappointing. As much as I get it, I just really feel it, and it's made me think about that because I know, like, I've been there. Where I live in New Brunswick, I'm a long distance from any NHL city. I've been to Montreal, which is an 8-hour drive for me. I've been to Boston, which is 6.5 to 7-hour drive for me. I've been to Ottawa, which is a 10-hour drive for me. And, I've been to NHL games in all those cities and a few others too. And I've had times when I've gone and some of the players I was hoping to see were not in the lineup. And it's unfortunate. You kind of feel like, you spent the money and now you just kind of gut punch that your favorite players are not going to be on the ice. So hopefully, Mitchie and Austin see this sign and do something. Maybe they can get him a puck or a stick or something. I don't know. Let's hope the right people at MLSE see that and maybe do something to make the kid feel better, because I'm sure his family and he are pretty bummed knowing that they're not going to be in action this evening. Now, we also found out as well the Boston Bruins have shut down David Krejci for the rest of the season. He'll hopefully be ready for game one of the playoffs, but the next couple of games until the playoffs start, he's not going to be playing. Jim Montgomery, the head coach, said essentially that, he's dealing with something. It's nothing major, and they just want to make sure that he has as much time to rest and get that taken care of as he can before they move on. A couple other actual signings today as well I didn't mention earlier. The Kraken also have another signing. They've also signed another prospect, David Goyette. It was a 19-year-old 2022 second-round pick center from the Sudbury Wolves. He gets his entry-level deal, and Vegas have signed Jesper Wickman, who's a 21-year-old Swedish goalie, taken in the 2020 draft as well. He's played his junior hockey in Canada and for the WHL's Vancouver Giants. Now, on to the trade talk of the section of the video. The New York Rangers, apparently, according to Frank Seravalli, have made it known to all 31 NHL teams that one of their prospects, drafted player Jaden Giroux, it was a 2021 third-round pick, will not likely be signed by the June 1st deadline, and that they would be willing to trade him if somebody wants their, the exclusive negotiating rights between now and then. He's having a pretty decent season. I don't really know what the reasons are that they're electing to not sign him. I know the Rangers have a pretty deep, organization right now when it comes to NHL players and prospects. Maybe they just don't want to take on another contract, but obviously this guy's decent. He's got 67 points in 64 games this year, playing for the WHL's Red Deer Rebels, 6'3" centerman, Calgary-born player. I'm not sure if there'll be any interest in the province of Alberta where he's from, but certainly a decent-looking prospect that really the Rangers are not going to sign. He was just drafted 2 years ago, putting up some good numbers at junior. I'm sure there's a team out there that would like to have this guy and add him to their depth chart. So we'll see where he might end up. But don't be shocked if we hear before the near future here that a trade's been taking place with them. Now, the Calgary Flames are one of the hot topics of the day as well. What kind of changes are we going to see? I've heard a lot of different opinions today, and listened to Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick talk about it on the Jeff Merrick Show. I've heard Fraser Valley talk about it on a couple of different programming places that he was on, the Barn Burner podcast, as well as his own show today, the Daily Face-Off Show. And I've also heard Eric Francis and, Ryan Leslie kind of throw in their 2 cents as well from Sportsnet. And essentially, they're all kind of all over the place. They don't really know what to think. But Frank Valley says he thinks 0 chance that both the coach and GM return next year. At least one of them will not return. Right now, Brad Treliving does not have a contract. Daryl Sutter is one of the very few people in the whole hockey ops department that is signed. And there's not even a given or guarantee that he's back, given how things have gone this year. Clearly, I think it's fair to say that there was enough scenarios that popped up that, where he caused a lot of frustrations within the team. Certainly, you can look at a lot of things for this team analytically and say that there's nothing to panic about. That was some, tweaks that maybe they can get back into playing better next year. You could probably put a lot of it on goaltending. Jacob Markstrom did not come through clutch when he needed to. He went from being a Vezina candidate to, really, kind of struggling. Ever since the Oilers series in last year's NHL playoffs, he hasn't been quite the same goalie. Not terrible by any means compared to league standards, but certainly not up to his high standards either. And that difference in his play could have made a huge difference. They had 17 overtime or shootout losses. That's a lot of points left on the board. Even if they knock that down to a more, league average of, say, 9 or 10, which I think is probably still a tad high for league average, probably more like 7 or 8. But even if they had like 9 or 10, that's still an extra, 8 points per se they could have had if they could have closed those games out. That would be all the difference between them being a playoff team and not only being a playoff team, but having a chance to get back into the, wildcard 1 spot maybe, or possibly even compete for the number 3 spot in the Pacific. I mean, they're kind of tight. They're still be probably a tad short, but still, they wouldn't be scrounging right to the final day trying to squeeze in. They'd be safe and secure, and the Winnipeg Jets would be the team that'd be in trouble here and be on the outside looking in by number of points. So that certainly played a huge role. I know Ryan Leslie talked about the fact he wonders about Michael Backlund. He's got 1 year left of his contract. There was some talk that after Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk left last year, that there was a time that he kind of wanted out too. At least there was some that thought that he might have asked for a trade. Obviously, it never happened. And he's obviously been a long time Flame, longest tenured guy there. Had himself personally a decent season. You got to wonder what he's thinking as well. Next year they need to find a way to bring in Dustin Wolf. He's too good for the American Hockey League at this point. They have, decent goaltending in Calgary, but Markstrom hasn't lived up to expectations. But at the same time, he's got a long-term deal with big money and a no-trade clause. So not like they can just move Markstrom. And I don't really want to go with a Dustin Wolf, Denny Vladar combination. That's a lot of inexperience there. So do they use Vladar even though he's, not part of the problem? Do they consider moving him for other pieces that might be able to help them in other ways and bring in Wolf as the backup? You gotta think that's a possibility. They have these young guys that need a more solid role, going into next year, whether that be Pelche, maybe Phillips, Coronado's going to want to know where he stands. It's just a lot to know. And Sarah Valley and Ryan Leslie have both said that they feel like this offseason to some degree could be quite eventful. Ryan Leslie said that he felt like it could be a catastrophic offseason and maybe be more chaotic than last year. Like, hard to say, but big things are likely going to be changing in Calgary. The big question marks are, who's running the show? Do you think you're going to see a change in GM, a change in coach? Is there a change in both positions? What are we seeing for players? There's some UFAs that, could be back or not back. Some players that are due for extensions that may or may not get them. What direction does this team go in next year? Obviously, they lost some big-time players, but they brought in some good players too. And the mix of guys they have, along with who's leading the pack, just doesn't seem to be getting the job done. So what do they do? Will the changes be as significant that some of these media members think they will be? Let me know what you think, and we'll discuss down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.